So recently I've been rewatching Desperate Housewives. It's kind of a thing I do in the spring to summer. It's just a major mood for me. And actually, let me know if you agree with this or not, but I think it's the female version of The Sopranos. But anyway, it's my first time rewatching it since fully becoming an author. And this time I've really noticed how masterfully the storylines unfold, gently, showing rather than telling. So that's what I want to talk about in today's video. How the show's depiction of specifically Bree Vandekamp's alcoholism is a masterclass in storytelling. And not only that, but also an excellent depiction of the slippery slide into addiction. If you don't know me, hi, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a horror and thriller author with a background in clinical psychology. And on this channel, we talk about all things cozy and spooky, so hit subscribe if you want to stick around. Without further ado, let's talk about Bree Vandekamp's casual descent into alcoholism. So to give you a little bit of a background, Bree Vandekamp has had a very bad year in season 2. Her husband died. It turned out her boyfriend was the one who killed her husband, then her boyfriend also offs himself. Her son has behavioral issues. Her family is falling apart. There's a lot of stress going on. And initially, we just start to see these very casual shots of Bree having a glass of wine with dinner, just as the other wives do, where we really don't think much of it. And then we start to see more subtle shots of her starting to drink alone after George's death. What this does is it unconsciously signals to the viewer, hey, this is important because I keep showing it to you. It's not just once or twice that we see her with a glass of wine, it's increasing in intensity. And finally, Andrew acknowledges her drinking problem when he says, aren't you forgetting something, and claims not to judge her vices so that she can't judge his vices. By this point, the audience probably has unconsciously caught on that Bree's drinking more wine than usual, but likely not consciously. Andrew acknowledging it is shining a light on something that now feels intuitive, that the audience feels they should have known all along, and they kind of did know all along. This is what successful foreshadowing looks like. The audience thinks, oh my god, I knew it, but they didn't actually think about it beforehand because it was so gradually done. And then the consequences of Bree's drinking start to take place. She has too much wine with lunch with the detective, she refuses to let him drive her home, and she gets a DUI for it. Her addiction started slowly with using the substance as a coping mechanism here and there, and I do think there's something to be said about how drinking alone can be problematic. When Bree starts drinking alone is when her alcohol problem actually starts. It highlights how alone she is in life. She's dealing with loss after loss, stressor after stressor. She's got nobody on her side. The people she thought were on her side turned out to be against her. And she starts to turn towards the friendship of wine. And then that coping mechanism, her friendship with wine, becomes a crutch that she finds it harder and harder to let go of. So we have her starting to misuse the substance combined with her denial that she has a problem, which starts to result in more negative consequences that land her in trouble. And those consequences will continue to escalate until she reaches some sort of rock bottom where she admits she has a problem. That's kind of how substance use typically unfolds. And the show does a really good job of showing that. Now, after her DUI, Bree is picked up by Betty, and Betty points out that she's had a difficult year, and she points out that, I wouldn't blame you if you were leaning on wine as a crutch. Bree's defensiveness here really reveals her denial, and the exchange also further entangles Bree and Betty in a mutually suspicious relationship that will continue to evolve over the course of the season. It's so masterfully done because the scene serves more than just one purpose, and those are the best scenes, the scenes that contain multiple reasons for existing in a piece of artwork. You need to have at least one reason for every scene that you contain in a piece of artwork, but more than one, that's when a story really starts to make sense. Then after that, we continue to see scenes in which wine bottles are shown even after her DUI. The fiction equivalent of this would be just describing the setting and including the bottles of wine casually in there. For example, you might say, Bree tapped the button on her voicemail machine to replay the message. With furrowed brows, she continued pulling groceries out of their paper bag. A loaf of bread, white mushrooms wrapped tautly in plastic, 2 bottles of red wine. And this is more showing rather than telling because it's hidden within the scene setting. It takes someone having kind of a keen eye to it to catch that detail. It's not the author just flat out saying, Bree once again reached for a bottle of wine. And at the end of that episode where we have Mary Alice's voice kind of wrapping up every character's arc from that episode, the theme is hidden diseases, addictions, and all the while panning over Bree drinking wine again. But the real confrontation with her addiction comes in the following episode. Bree goes out to a nice dinner alone and gets plastered, and then she passes out on her front lawn. Mrs. McCluskey sees her, And so here again, we're starting to see more negative consequences to her drinking. It's getting harder to keep her drinking problem a secret. Afterwards, Bree denies being hungover to her kids. She's looking a little bit more disheveled than usual, which is very atypical for her character. And it's again showing the effects of her alcohol problem on her as a person, because the Bree we know would never have a hair out of place. But now that she is disintegrating into this addiction, she's starting to lose a little bit of what makes her Bree. Then in that same episode, Lynette chooses Bree over Mrs. McCluskey as a nanny, which is the perfect plotline for what's about to come. This scene not only sets up Lynette realizing that Bree has a problem, but also her realizing that Mrs. McCluskey is more trustworthy than she thinks, which also brings the two of them closer together. Again, this is one of those scenes that serves more than one function, and that's what makes it such brilliant storytelling. The plot fits together like perfect puzzle pieces. And then while Bree is babysitting Lynette's kids, she opens a bottle of wine because, of course, Lynette's kids are a handful. Then she falls asleep and the kids run off on their own. Here again, the puzzle pieces fit perfectly. It had to be Lynette's kids that she was watching because we already know they're a handful, so they drove her to drink. And it had to be Lynette because she's much more direct and confrontational of a person than some of the other wives on the show. And then Mrs. McCluskey asks Lynette what she's looking for in a babysitter, and she reveals that she found Bree passed out on her lawn, that she smelled wine on Bree's breath when she was looking for the kids. And what I find to be so brilliant in this scene is it's very focused on the trashed hands. We see Lynette taking out her trash while she's talking to Mrs. McCluskey, then we see Bree taking out her own trash, and this is when Lynette confronts Bree on losing track of her kids. The camera has a very interesting point of view here, where Bree's trash can is centered in the shot. It's again foreshadowing. It's unconsciously sending viewers the message that the trash can is the center of attention in this particular scene or episode, and that it will be important later on. And again, it's probably so subtle that most viewers won't even notice it, but they might unconsciously pick up on it, and it'll make sense later. The foreshadowing makes viewers or readers at a later point realize, oh my god, I knew it, even if it was just unconscious, because it was just that subtle. It was that much of showing rather than telling. We also see Lynette taking a long look at Bree's trash can as she puts it in the bin. Lynette finally confronts her and asks her if she was drinking. Bree immediately denies it. Then she admits to the tiniest bit of Chardonnay. She blames her antihistamines, so again we see this self-denial of her problem. And then Lynette goes through her trash can. And this is when the finale of this episode starts. And the theme that Mary Alice's voice is talking about in this finale is favors. So it pans over other characters, and we temporarily forget about what Lynette is doing in Bree's trash can. But then by the time it's back to Lynette at the end of the episode, we see the results of her going through Bree's trash. She's lined up all the empty wine bottles on Bree's porch, while the narration points out that Lynette is a real friend to Bree for doing this, that she just did her a huge favor because she's forcing her to confront what she's been denying. Since this is the confrontation moment for Bree, I'll stop here, but the rest of Bree's journey with her alcohol issues is also masterfully depicted. We see her sort of quasi-recovery where she begins attending AA but has no intention of actually staying sober, then her actually trying to stay sober, actually trying to work through the stages of change, faltering, relapsing a few times, experiencing more negative consequences of her drinking, and eventually committing to sobriety. But the part I really want to drive home here is how to steal from the masterful execution of Bree's descent into alcoholism in your own artwork or your own writing. Through the setting, you can find small ways of foreshadowing through props or character descriptions or choreography. For example, let's say that your protagonist is going to be in a boat crash in the big final scene of your novel. So you might describe a Victorian-era painting of a shipwreck behind them at a restaurant, or describe their hair as resembling dark algae, or describe the wind as an easterly, which is a type of storm that they talk about on ships coming from the east. Small, tiny ways of just putting more of those motifs that foreshadow it's what to come, where the reader doesn't necessarily put their finger on it, but unconsciously they pick up on it. Then you start to show characters in small confrontations and eventually big confrontations. And you want to have multiple confrontations so that it starts to feel like a natural evolution. It's not sudden, it's not coming out of left field, it feels very natural. And you want to get the character in increasing trouble in each scene, in each of these confrontations where it's escalating. Remember also that idea of having puzzle pieces, that each character's arc has to fit perfectly with the other character's arcs. And the way that they interact with each other has to further the plot in different ways. And every scene should serve ideally more than one function. That's where the really good meaty scenes take place. In terms of themes and motifs, you also want to sort of center them for emphasis, like with the trash can. And then at the end of all this, when you finally have the confrontation, just like the finale where Mary Alice is wrapping up each episode, you can finally put the problem into words. And it'll be like a satisfying click for readers. It's kind of like what I tried to do at the end of A Song at Dead Man's Cove, which is this book, by the way, if you want to check it out, links in my description box. Up until then, you know, the meaning of the siren, the different depictions of the siren, the ocean themes were just kind of like embedded within the story. But in the very last scene, that's really when I kind of verbally hinted at what the siren call actually meant. So I hope that this was helpful. If you are also a fan of Desperate Housewives, I would love to know what you think of either Bree's arc or just the show in general, because I'm so obsessed with it. It's such a feel-good thing to watch right now. And yeah, looking forward to reading your comments, and I'll see you soon.